It happened at 4:42 p.m. on a Wednesday. Downtown was buzzing as it always was. Horns blared, shoes slapped pavement, screens lit faces that never looked up. The crosswalk on 12th and Main glowed red. People kept walking, and in the chaos, no one noticed the body lying just inches from the curb. Not a man, a dog, a large German shepherd, crumpled just beyond the painted stripes. Blood streaked the concrete beneath one hind leg, dark and glossy. His breathing was shallow but visible. His eyes half-lidded still searched the crowd, but no one stopped. A delivery van swerved around him. A cyclist cursed and pedaled past. A woman in heels stepped around without ever looking down. To them, he was a shadow, an inconvenience, maybe roadkill, maybe nothing at all. The city moved on. Security footage would later show him crawling from the sidewalk just moments before, dragging his back legs trying to cross. Something had hit him. Hard. No driver reported it, no witness came forward. He had no collar, no tags, just a faint tattoo on the inner ear. Letters faded from sun and service. Canine R71 Ranger. That was his name. He used to be seen, saluted, cheered. He used to wear a badge on his harness and ride in the front seat of a squad car. He used to charge into places officers feared to go, sniffing for bombs, tracking fugitives, comforting victims. And now, he lay unnoticed, bleeding into the gutter. The irony. He had crossed that intersection hundreds of times before, always in uniform, always beside a handler, always with people watching. But today, nobody saw him, except one. A boy, no more than 10, standing by, the bus stop across the street, clutching a backpack twice his size. His shoes were torn, laces uneven. His hoodie hung loose around his frame. His eyes didn't flinch. He saw the blood, the trembling, and he stepped off the curb. No one else moved. No one else even noticed the boy moving against the crowd. He crossed the street slowly, carefully, approaching the dog like a secret. He didn't pet him, didn't say anything. He just knelt beside him, placed a hand on the dog's paw, and whispered something that the camera didn't catch. But if you zoom in close enough, just as the sun hits the broken lens of the nearby bus shelter, you can read his lips. I see you. That's where this story begins, not with a crash, not with a chase, but with a moment that dared to stand still in a world that didn't. Because before anyone else cared, one boy saw a hero. The world had already forgotten. Long before his blood stained the pavement at 12th and Main, Ranger was a name whispered with respect, not the kind shouted at dog parks or written on pet food bowls, the kind carried in dispatch radios and spoken over crackling intercoms, the kind that made officers stand straighter when he entered the room. K9 Unit, Ranger ID R71, 4 years on the force, 3 confirmed fines and missing child cases. 1 takedown of an armed suspect that saved a rookie's life. 0 hesitation. He was trained to move without fear, to hold his position under fire, to detect the scent of danger before humans even sensed tension in the air. And beyond the obedience drills, the scent tracking, the controlled aggression, there was something more. Ranger loved the job. He didn't just follow commands. He understood them. There was a moment captured in an old photo. An officer crouched behind a concrete barrier during a hostage standoff, sweat on his brow, hands shaking. Behind him, Ranger stood, still, ears pricked forward, eyes locked on the building. He wasn't watching for threats, he was watching the man. That was the job. To be the steady presence, the fearless shadow. And he had never failed. But even heroes age. Muscles stiffen, eyes lose sharpness. Joints ache from too many cold mornings. Ranger was 7 when the department made the call. Early retirement, not because he couldn't perform, but because the new chief favored drones and software. A dog's just liability, one official said. Too many lawsuits waiting to happen. They gave him a ceremony, a plaque, a folded flag, an officer's badge etched onto a collar he wouldn't wear again. Then they rehomed him. The handler he'd bonded with for years had been reassigned. A new family took him in, a well-meaning one with 2 teenagers, a fenced yard, and a golden retriever named Peach. Ranger didn't understand. One day he was on patrol. The next he was sitting on a porch watching a sprinkler turn. He waited at the door every morning, ears perked, tail still. He knew the schedule. Shift started at 7 a.m., briefing at 6:45. The cruiser was always late by 3 minutes, but the door never opened. No one called his name in the same clipped tone. No one clipped on a vest. No one said, "Let's roll." They said, "Go play." And he tried. He tried to be normal. But the city had carved something into his bones: vigilance, purpose, instinct. So when the front gate clicked open on a Tuesday afternoon and he heard a scream 2 blocks away, a child's voice sharp with panic, he didn't hesitate. He ran. Peach stayed, but Ranger crossed the street, turned the corner, and found the source. A young boy, barely able to speak, stuck beneath a fallen bicycle as a car backed up dangerously close. Ranger barked once, loud, commanding. It worked. The driver braked, startled, and the boy scrambled to his feet, unharmed. He didn't even see Ranger. He just ran home. Ranger turned to follow, but the driver didn't. The engine roared. A flash of bumper, a scream of rubber, then silence. Ranger was struck mid-stride. His body hit the ground with a sickening thud, legs twisting beneath him. The vehicle didn't stop. It turned down the next street and disappeared. He lay there for seconds that felt like winters, breath ragged, unable to move his hind legs. The boy was safe. But no one saw him fall, and no one came back. He dragged himself out of the road with the last strength he had, collapsing near the crosswalk where he'd once stood in uniform, admired. And that's where the city left him. Wounded. Invisible. He blinked against the sun, ears still twitching at every passing footstep. Hoping. Waiting. Would someone stop? Would someone kneel? Would someone notice the scar behind his ear? The one he got during the warehouse explosion? Or the faded ink that marked him K9, a servant of the people? Hours passed, no one did. Until the boy appeared. Not the one from the bike. A different one, smaller, quieter, but with the same look in his eyes, like he understood something others had. Forgotten. The boy didn't run, didn't film, didn't flinch. He simply knelt beside Ranger, placed a trembling hand on his paw, and whispered, "I see you." And somehow, in the dust and heat and pain, those 3 words pierced deeper than the collision ever could. Because Ranger had survived danger. But this, being forgotten, this was a different kind of wound. The kind that left no blood. Only silence. The boy's name was Micah, 10 years old, soft-spoken, wore his hoodie too tight around his face like he was always bracing for a wind that never came. He didn't talk much in class, didn't stand up for himself when the bigger kids pushed past him in the lunch line. But when he saw the dog lying by the crosswalk, broken and alone, Micah moved. He didn't look around to see if anyone else would help. He didn't need permission. He stepped into the street. No one yelled at him. No one told him to get out of the way, because no one was looking. The city churned around him, a blur of engines and earbuds. People passed within inches of Ranger, stepping around the puddle of blood like it was just another crack in the sidewalk. The flashing sign warned, "Walk," in bright white letters, but no one walking noticed the boy kneeling beside a dying. Dog Micah took off his hoodie and pressed it gently to the wound on Ranger's leg. His hands shook, but not from fear, from urgency. He didn't know how to help, but he knew he had to. "Hold on, okay?" he whispered, voice trembling. "You're not gonna die here." A passing man glanced down, saw the mess, and kept walking. Woman hesitated, phone in hand, and then turned away. A food delivery biker slowed down, then sped up again, mumbling something about "not my problem." Micah didn't move. He wasn't angry. He was focused. When Ranger let out a low, strangled whimper, Micah winced. Then he pulled a small flip phone from his backpack, his emergency-only device, and called the one number he knew would answer. His mother. She picked up on the third ring. Micah? Her voice was tense. She was a trauma nurse, always alert, always working. Where are you? You were supposed to be at the library. I need help, Micah said. There's a dog. He's, really hurt, bleeding. I think he got hit by a car. Okay, baby, where are you? 12th and Main. There was silence on the line, a strange kind. Is the dog big German Shepherd? Yeah, stay there, don't move. She hung up. Micah didn't know why his mom's voice had changed. Didn't know that just 5 years earlier she'd held that same dog's head in her lap, while paramedics worked on an officer who'd been shot during a drug raid. She remembered the steady weight of Ranger beside the fallen man, refusing to leave. She remembered looking into the dog's eyes and thinking, he knows. When she arrived 10 minutes later in scrubs and a windbreaker, she didn't ask questions. She saw the blood, saw the hoodie pressed tight, saw Micah's pale face and shaking arms. She went straight into nurse mode. Keep pressure here, she said, kneeling. Don't lift it. I've got gauze in the car. When the vet ambulance arrived, called in as a favor through her emergency contact, Micah watched them load Ranger onto the stretcher with all the care of a human trauma victim. They didn't ask who owned him. They didn't ask what happened, they just moved. Ranger didn't resist, but his eyes opened briefly, and when they did, they locked on Micah. There was no panic, no growl, just stillness. Micah reached out one last time before the doors closed and touched Ranger's ear, right over the faint tattoo that marked him as a K9. The boy didn't know what it meant, not yet, but something passed between them in that moment. A current, a question, maybe even a promise. That night, back in their small apartment, Micah asked his mom, why didn't anyone stop? She paused. There was no easy answer. People are busy, she said finally, scared, or they think someone else will help. But he was right there. I know. Micah didn't say anything for a while. Then he didn't bark. He didn't try to bite, he just looked at me. Yeah, she said, brushing his hair back. He's done that before. She told him then about the raid, the officer, the blood, the way Ranger had sat beside the fallen body without flinching. How she'd whispered to him, just like Micah had done earlier that day. You remember? He asked, wide-eyed. She nodded. He remembers too. Across town in a quiet emergency vet clinic, Ranger lay sedated under a heating pad. IVs in his forelegs, bandages tight, monitors blinking slow and steady. The vet techs didn't speak much. They weren't sure he'd make it through the night. Internal bleeding, fractures, shock. The kind of trauma that didn't always show up on scans but lived deep in bones and memory. But Ranger breathed, and when one of them reached to adjust the blanket, he didn't flinch, just blinked. Still watching, still waiting. Not far from the clinic, a man sat in a truck parked beneath a broken streetlight. He wore a ball cap low, one hand tapping against the steering wheel. In his other hand, a crumpled newspaper, clipping. K9 retired after lifetime of service. Below it, a photo, Ranger in uniform, standing tall beside a man in sunglasses. The man in the truck stared at the picture for a long time, then tore it in half and started the engine. Micah didn't sleep that night. He lay on his side, arms curled under his pillow, eyes wide in the dark. His mind replayed every detail. The weight of the dog's head on his lap, the warmth of blood through fabric, the way Ranger had looked at him like he was the only steady thing left in the world. His mom came in around 2 a.m., still in her scrubs. She sat on the edge of his bed and whispered, "He's alive." That was all she said. Micah nodded once, didn't cry, didn't smile. He just exhaled, long and slow. The next morning, while other kids were still brushing teeth or finishing cereal, Micah was tying his shoelaces, waiting by the door with the quiet intensity of someone on a mission. His mom hesitated. "You want to come with me?" Micah nodded. "I have to." They drove across the city in silence. Outside the vet clinic, the snow was just beginning to fall again, soft flakes spiraling in windless air, blanketing everything with a hush that felt like reverence. Inside, The receptionist looked up. "You're back." Micah didn't answer. He just walked to the door marked ICU and waited until someone let him in. When he stepped into the room, the world tilted. There, on a raised pad beneath a space heater, lay Ranger. His leg was splinted, his side bandaged. Tubes ran from his limbs into bags of fluid. He looked smaller somehow, stripped of the power and presence Micah remembered. But his eyes, those hadn't changed. They opened the moment Micah stepped in, and they followed him as he approached. Micah knelt beside the bed, rested one hand on the floor, and said, "Hi." No reaction, just slow, steady blinking. The vet, Dr. Salinas, stood nearby, observing. "He's in pain," she said softly, "but he knows you." Micah nodded. "He wouldn't let anyone near him last night," she added. "Until I mentioned you were the one who found him." Ranger's paw shifted slightly, a twitch, the smallest movement. But it was enough. Micah reached forward and laid his hand gently on the dog's shoulder. "You remember me, don't you?" Ranger exhaled, long and deliberate. And for the first time in days, Micah smiled. What no one knew, what even Micah's mother hadn't seen, was that something had changed in the boy, too. For most of his life, he had felt invisible, passed over. Kiu, background blur in the storylines of other louder kids. He'd learned to make himself smaller so the world wouldn't press so hard against him. But when Ranger looked at him, he didn't see small. He saw anchor, purpose. And it anchored Micah, too. Over the next few days, Micah came every morning before school and every evening after. He brought books and read aloud. He brought boiled chicken, spoon-fed carefully. He sat on the floor while Ranger dozed, and sometimes, when no one was watching, he'd press his forehead to the dog's side, just to feel him breathe. And Ranger breathed, steadily, heavily. He was healing. But danger hadn't passed. Not really. Because 2 nights later, a shadow returned. It was late, close to midnight. Micah had just fallen asleep on a cot beside Ranger's kennel, his shoes still on. The vet tech had gone to the back room. The lights buzzed faintly overhead. Then came the sound, a soft click at the front door. Subtle, controlled, like someone who didn't want to be heard, but didn't care if they were seen. The door didn't open, but something slid under it. A manila envelope, the kind used for paperwork. The kind no one wants to receive. Micah stirred. Ranger's ears twitched. By the time the vet tech returned, the hallway was empty again. She found Micah awake, standing over the envelope. He handed it to her without a word. She opened it slowly. Inside, a photograph, a grainy image of Ranger taken from behind a chain-link fence. It wasn't recent. The scars were older, the fur darker. But the eyes, those eyes, were unmistakable. Scrawled across the photo in marker. Some dogs don't stay quiet forever. They called the police, filed a report, but no one had seen anything. No, cameras caught a face, and the only clue was a smudge of grease on the envelope, likely from truck tires. Micah's mother was livid. She wanted to pull Micah out, keep him safe, but Micah refused. "I'm not leaving him," he said. "Micah, someone is watching. That's dangerous." He didn't leave that boy with the bike. He ran to help, even when it hurt. There was no argument left. She let him stay. That night, Micah took the envelope and placed it under Ranger's blanket. "Don't worry," he said softly. "They don't get to scare us." And Ranger, still too weak to rise, closed his eyes, not in pain, but in peace. Outside the clinic, the man in the truck sat once more beneath the same streetlight, the same ball cap, the same silence. He watched the window for a long time. Then he reached into his glove compartment, pulled out a dog collar, black leather, blood-stained, and held it in his lap like a relic. On the metal tag, a single scratched-out name, and beneath it, one word carved, "Deep Property." The snow stopped falling on the 5th morning. The city looked clean again, quiet, like it had forgotten the blood on the sidewalk, the sirens, the people who walked past and didn't see. But inside the clinic, nothing had been forgotten. Not by Ranger, and not by Micah. Ranger could stand now, though it took effort. His injured leg remained wrapped in thick gauze, his gait stiff, uneven. But every day he moved a little farther. Every day he let someone touch him a little longer. He didn't flinch when Micah approached anymore. He leaned into it. They'd become a pair, like they'd always belonged in the same frame. Two souls stitched together by something more than chance, more than timing, something deeper. Micah read to him now from books about heroes, not the ones in capes, but the ones who showed up when no one else did. And when Ranger drifted to sleep, Micah sat beside him and whispered things he didn't say to anyone else. Secrets, fears, hope. He told Ranger about the kids at school who didn't know his name, about how he hated loud places, about how he sometimes wished he could disappear. "You get it," he said. "You didn't ask to be left behind either." Ranger didn't answer, of course, but he listened. And sometimes that was more than enough. Dr. Salinas called Ranger a miracle dog. The staff had never seen a recovery so steep, so determined. The way his vitals stabilized, the way he refused to stay down, the way he pulled toward the window every time Micah walked in, as if counting the seconds between visits. But Micah's mother knew better. It wasn't just medicine. It was will. Purpose. Ranger had found his reason again. And it had. The name Micah. "He's not just recovering," she said one evening, standing beside Salinas. "He's choosing to stay." The vet nodded. "He still thinks he has a job to do, and he did. Not as a tracker, not as a chaser, but as a guardian of one boy who saw him when no one else would." That night, as Micah laid down on the cot, Ranger pushed himself to his feet and limped over, just far enough to lay his head across the boy's chest. Micah froze at first, then smiled. "I got you," he whispered. Ranger exhaled, and in that moment it was clear he hadn't just survived the world's silence. He'd answered it, with loyalty, with love, and with quiet, unshakable purpose. Because heroes don't disappear when the job ends. Sometimes, the job just changes, and for Ranger, it had only just begun. 2 weeks later, Ranger walked unassisted for the first time. It wasn't far, just from his kennel to the waiting room, but every step was deliberate, balanced, defiant. The scar on his leg had begun to heal, though it would never vanish. It would stay as part of him, a signature of survival. Micah was there, of course, sitting cross-legged on the floor, holding a toy he'd bought with his own allowance, a small plush in the shape of a police badge. Ranger stopped in front of him and sat, slow and steady, like a soldier reporting for duty. Micah didn't say anything. He just reached up and clipped a new tag onto the dog's collar. Not property, not K9R71, just one word. Partner. News of Ranger's rescue had quietly begun to spread. A retired detective wrote a blog post about him. A few local officers stopped by the clinic just to see him. One even left a photo, an old unit, shot where Ranger stood front and center, tongue out, tail proud. But the most unexpected call came from a small nonprofit based just outside Helena. They trained therapy dogs for children in trauma recovery and had recently launched a pilot program for retired service animals with unfinished work. Ranger was a perfect candidate. They didn't want to retrain him. They wanted to honor him, to give him new work that involved sitting quietly with children in courtrooms, walking slowly beside veterans at rehab, or simply existing in spaces where the presence of something steady, silent, and kind could mean everything. Micah's mom hesitated at first, but Micah didn't. He said yes before the question was even finished. "This isn't just my story," he told her. "It's his." And yet not all attention was welcome. The man in the truck had returned. Not to the clinic, but to a location deeper in the woods. A place marked on an old folded map. A place with fences. He wasn't alone this time. There were others, men in gloves, a woman with a clipboard, A new shipment had arrived, 3 dogs, one already limping, all silent. One man turned to him and said, "You sure it's safe to keep going?" The man in the truck said nothing. He just lit a cigarette and stared into the trees. They found the shepherd, the one that got out. Still, no answer. Then finally, "Doesn't matter, he can't prove anything." But as smoke curled into the air, the man's eyes narrowed, because deep down he knew something had shifted. That dog, Ranger, hadn't just survived. He had reawakened something. And this time he wasn't alone. To be continued. Episode 2. The Forest with No Sound. Coming soon.